I don't think I've ever seen a quilter use smaller physical space than Riché for making a quilt. And so she has to be extraordinarily organized because she has so little space in her apartment.
The quilts tend to have rooted hair and eyelashes and painted on features, fingernails, and they have a coming up off the page effect. In that sense, some of the quilts have been developed as installations with shoes and other features.
And she has stacks and stacks and stacks of felt of all of the ranges from light white to dark black to represent the range of skin tones that she's going to use for flesh. And she's very meticulous looking at the photographs of her family members to match the darker complexions with the darker, more appropriate felt.
It's a quilt that is based on a photograph from our family album taken in the early 1950s on Easter Sunday.
Her quilts capture, for the most part, formal moments in her own life and in her family's life. The most part when people are dressed up for occasions. That was something that was quite important to the family. They invested a lot in these occasions and dressing appropriately for them. In counterbalance, I think, to the stereotype of Southern African Americans as being unkempt and not clean. Her family's meticulous, and the quilts represent that whole side of black life that isn't always captured.
It's based on a photograph from 1954, which was the eve of the bus boycott in Montgomery, and also the same year of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And it's a piece that I think communicates that even in a place like Montgomery, Alabama, before those monumental rulings came about, African Americans lived very productive lives. They celebrated the holidays that all other Americans valued. They loved their children. I think those messages come across very, very strongly in a piece like that, although on the surface it seems really, innocuous in terms of its representation of children. But the moment, I think, says it all.
We've got her mother and uncle as children in a portrait of them in their Sunday best. The beautiful pale blue dress, the little white bow, the perfect trim, the white socks and shoes. I was born in 1955, and one of my first memories is of a trip that my mother, sister, and I went on to Atlantic City, New Jersey. It was a vacation. Now, not everyone realizes this by looking at me, but I am African American. My family has a range of complexions from very light, like mine. My sister is darker. Everyone who looks at my sister recognizes her as African American. So it was the 1950s. We had to stay in what was then called a colored boarding house. We took the train home. My father didn't go with us. He couldn't get off from work. And we were dressed up because it was a train ride. And I had a white dress, a very similar material to this, with little pink half moons all over it. And I have this memory of getting into the train station and my father lifting me off the train with this dress on, and him being really happy to see me, that I was home, and me being really happy to see Daddy, and just really pleased to be home. And there's something about this quilt that always brings back that memory for me of that encounter with my father. So when I'm not in Paris, this is my favorite quilt.
An easy approach might have been to have the legs melt down into the bottom of the quilt, but I decided that that just would not do, that somehow I would have to pull off this feat of attaching the shoes. And so I went through all kinds of mental gymnastics imagining how I might accomplish that, including this idea of maybe having shoes cut in half, of going to some shoemaker and making a humble plea, probably confusing on some levels as well. But ultimately I realized that I could, have the whole shoes included and just secure them. And so it ended up being much easier than it seemed to be in the very beginning.
The little boy's outfit for her uncle, reflecting the care that the family had taken in themselves. You contrast this to many of the images that I've studied in terms of images of blacks in popular culture, where black children are depicted as pickaninnies and their hair is sloppy, the shoulders of the overalls will be hanging off, they're dirty, they're unclothed, they're tattered. You know, those are the images that were commonplace in films and cartoons and so forth. This is a political statement in that the family is depicted externally by the power structure as not being stable, of being out of control. And here you've got complete control from their posture, from the clothing, from the smiles. And so that it really shows another side of black life.
Some of my work attempts to recapture images that I originally have encountered in photography. In some cases, I've been particularly invested in capturing family pictures, in others in capturing political and cultural figures. So the project began with family, and I think that ultimately gave me the faith to move out and stretch beyond that to be more inclusive.
I think Riché's work will be very well received.
And look at that. Wonderful.
She's captured a slice of African American life that there hasn't been really a lot of attention to, and I think that will be celebrated.
They're beautiful pictures. Beautiful pictures.